All right, welcome everybody to another Open Game Data Office Hour session. Just do a brief intro of what these are, and then I'll hand it off to Curt. So the Open Game Data community is this NSF-funded research incubator where we are looking to convene a community of people that are interested in using data in and around games to understand various aspects of human psychology, learning, decision-making, etc. And part of our goal here is to compile a collection of resources and best practices to do this kind of stuff, and that's one of the goals of this office hour session. But then also long-term, we're looking to build some shared infrastructure to actually be able to do this stuff together. And so another thing these office hour sessions are helping us understand is what are the needs of the community and what are their interests. So how these office hour sessions work, they're inspired by a series of sessions that the Statistical Education Research Group used to do here at CMU, where a presenter, usually a student or a postdoc, would talk about a project they're working on, and then essentially do a public workshop with a stats faculty member who would be like, oh, maybe like show me your code, or what are you thinking, or why do you think this is doing? And it was really great, just as even as an audience member, to see like how do people think about these problems, how do experts like kind of break apart things. And so the goal here is to talk about work in progress, talk about how people are approaching things and what they're thinking about and how they want to do stuff, so that we can kind of surface some of those insights. Sessions are recorded pending presenter approval, and we are putting them together in kind of a library on a Google spreadsheet of all the different sessions that we've done. A couple things to keep in mind: presenters are usually showing work that is in progress publicly, and so sometimes that can come with some considerations of keep that in mind. They might not be done with everything, or there might be some things still in questions or in flux or whatever. And part of our goal here is to help them make progress. And then these sessions are also about learning for everybody involved. So if you hear somebody say something or some concept or some idea that you've never heard of before, you don't understand, feel free to just raise your hand and ask, and we can try to clarify. And with that, I will hand it off to Curt.
Erik. I'm gonna pull up. So I was just talking to Erik. I did everything in GoodNotes, somewhat experimental and also quick. So if anything is unclear, just let me know. I guess maybe I should drop that link again. There's a link in the chat where you can get this document online, make comments, and see at your own pace too. So I'm Curt Fulwilder. I'm at FSU, Florida State University. I'm working on my dissertation for instructional systems design. And I was silly enough to make it a goal of mine to create a game for my dissertation, because at the time I didn't know open game data existed. I didn't know any of this, and I'm looking around and there were no games. There wasn't anything that would fit my needs. So I was like, well, I got to make it. There's no other choice. So I'm plowing through ahead with that goal. A couple of goals. So my goal for my dissertation overall is to measure self-efficacy beliefs from user gameplay data. And since if you don't know, self-efficacy beliefs very domain specific, very relative to the context. So that's where I came in with, I need a game. I need this game to be tailored specifically to the goal. The gameplay goal, so my presentation is two sides. I have my goal, which is the dissertation, the studies design side, which is somewhat new and fresh because I just revised it all again a couple days ago. But the big thing that I'm really focused on is the gameplay, because there's a couple of game design issues that I'm wanting to try and work out. The overall goal for the game is to get enough reputation to join a guild. So Alchemist theme, to join a guild, I'll talk more about it later, of the player's choice. And then the instructional goal is developing intuitive understanding of measures of central tendency and variance. I'm trying to go past formulaic, because so many people know, mean is add up your numbers, divide by n. But I noticed as I'm TAing for different stats courses that a lot of people don't quite have a true intuitive understanding of how the mean and the standard deviation can change the distribution. I'm not super interested in the instructional goal today. That's pretty well set, but that gives context. So I'm going to try and go through a lot really fast so we just have the background. I just found recently this McQuiggan 2006. They did basically what I'm wanting to do with an ITS, an intelligent tutoring system, and Crystal Island. They use naive Bayes and decision trees. They got around between 82 to 86 accuracy. They were using gameplay telemetry, self-reports, and biofeedback. So really cool to read about, very impractical to implement, but still exciting. You know, who doesn't like biofeedback data? Self-efficacy is super important, predictive of academic achievement, a lot of important aspects of life. It's very overlooked, in my opinion. And we don't really have any we have tried and true measures, but none that can be used regularly in the classroom again and again. Too hard to interpret for your regular everyday teacher. They have to be made to fit the context and the domain. And self-efficacy is very dynamic. You know, it's variable. It changes moment to moment. So, although McQuiggan is a really cool approach, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in the classroom. It's not practical, and that's what we need. I do this little black box. It's supposed to be Skinner's black box, and I assume, actually I don't know how diverse the audience is as far as background in educational psychology and such, but Skinner black box. The mind is the black box. We can't see inside of it, so we look at the behaviors that are coming out of it to assessment and understanding what people know. Bandura specifically comes and specifically addressed that in one of his papers, which is kind of fun, saying that no, self-efficacy is operating inside this black box, and we can get at it, and we should get at it because it influences the behaviors that are coming out of the box. So what I'm seeing with overlooking self-efficacy is a huge bias in the foundational principles of assessment. That's why self-efficacy needs to be addressed, because I pull out my Bandura book, but somebody that may know the information very well could be overruled by self-doubt and be unable to perform. I mean, that's the clearest example. My goal in this is to look at these constructs like self-efficacy. This is broader picture. Self-efficacy, self-concept, motivation, they're unobservable. I'm kind of drifting into the territory of non-cognitives, which is a very fuzzy term. So, you know, it's kind of whatever you want to throw in there. I think it's be called a non-cognitive, but very generally these two layers, the ones that we can't see, and then there's ones we can see, the persistence, the goal setting, and the risk taking. These are literally like the observable is defined in their definition. Persistence, number of attempts, time spent on a difficult task. And there's a complex system that's going on between all of these where self-efficacy and the unobserveds are influencing the observes. So wanting to focus on using the observables to get an idea of the unobservables. It's not a particularly novel concept, you know. This is kind of what we do in research. So there's nothing groundbreaking about that, but I'm trying to specifically zoom in on the non-cogs and use one construct to try and get at these other ones that currently, like self-efficacy, biggest beef. The only thing we have is self-report, and enough said. We all know the issues with self-report. To get at that, to kind of tackle that goal and to go about this approach, utilizing game-based learning, learning analytics, and evidence-centered design. The game-based learning gives us the environment for authentic behavior, but they're difficult to build, which I'm experiencing now. But the ECD helps with building the game-based learning because it provides a framework for choosing behaviors and designing the games. The learning analytics helps us make sense of the complexity. ECD gives us the framework for engineering behaviors and context, but ECD struggles with complexity because you need to try and translate a concept into these easy to view behaviors, that behavioral aspect. So learning analytics can help us approach some of that difficulty, or some of that complexity. And the ECD also helps us design the game. So there's an interaction between these three. The learning analytics, the only downside there is some difficulty in explaining the interpretations, the outputs, and that's still just a lingering problem that I have. I haven't addressed that yet. For the example of how ECD is influencing the design of the study and the game, I'm taking the theory using Tolman diagrams, taking the theory. So if we look at self-efficacy, we look at the behaviors that we're looking for, like persistence. And then this is the process I'm going through to turn persistence into target behaviors, into game design behaviors. So I have a different Tolman diagram for each observable construct that I'm working on. Study design, pre-test, post-test, knowledge and self-efficacy. I'm looking to do kind of a train test, supervised, use the pre and post test as labels, or probably the pre and post test as labels. But as we know, self-efficacy is not ideal, or self-report isn't ideal. So I want to also do some clustering, some unsupervised clustering, and then see if the groups that come out of the data that I'm using, if I can see patterns in their self-efficacy beliefs along those groups, to try and help validate, boost the argument that what we have is measuring self-efficacy, or at least something there. This is a kind of a side piece that is going to be the first thing I drop from my study. I'm trying to work out how to do an NPC interviewer, where instead of using our self-report, we have a instructional agent that's asking questions and trying to. I've even talked with somebody about if we can prime like a chat GPT kind of agent that can get at some of this. That would be just for fun. But if we can get through that, if we can make that work, then some measure of agreement between the self-report measures and what the NPC interviewer came out with. Okay, that's the study design. That's kind of the research background of it. I can pause if anything was unclear, if anybody had questions about that before I move on to the game, the fun one.
So when you say clustering here, clustering over what? Is it like gameplay behaviors? Is it measures? Would self-efficacy be a variable that's in the clustering algorithm, or?
No, I want to try and remove it from that, because I'm basing my behaviors very strictly. I guess I didn't cover those, but it's not persistence, risk taking, and goal setting. So looking at that for the telemetry or the metrics, and see what comes of it.
So you'd be looking to cluster over some measure of those three things, or would you be looking to cluster over like raw gameplay behavior? Like how many layers are you talking here?
That's a great question. I'm open to all. For a while now, I've been, working in the ECD side. We're trying to distill these down to clean metrics, time on, the average time spent on a task, something like that. But I was just starting the other day I read a paper that was looking at, what was it? I forgot. It's a type of neural network. I can't remember now. And I was trying to figure out if there was some way to use the sequence of basically more of the raw telemetry data to look for patterns and behaviors. Another paper that I was looking through and mentioned it's important to view motivation and this whole cloud of these constructs as a complex system, which I think is very accurate. And they mentioned fractal analysis, which I don't know anything about, but I was gonna explore that a little bit. So those are, main goal is the aggregate metrics, want to look at something that's more pattern recognition, the sequential, and then I have no idea what that fractal analysis is, but it sounds cool. So
Sure.
let's see what that is. Did I answer the question?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Okay, then game. This is the more fun part. So this game came about because my advisor came up with a question on one of her stats research tests that she was so very, very proud of. And the question was, she provides a mean and a standard deviation, and you need to provide a set of data that will yield that mean and standard deviation. And we all very marveled at it. And a lot of us, people, this is early on in the program, and we're like, whoa, this is harder than we thought at first. And once you got it, you're like, oh, that's really obvious. But it did get, it was able to differentiate between those who had more of a formulaic understanding and those who had a more intuitive understanding. So my game, the placeholder name that's basically stuck is Mean Alchemy, MEAN, mean, like mean. And in it, the players are tasked with their students, alchemy students, and they need to complete a series of quests and tasks to gain enough reputation to join one of the two guilds. We have a civil guild, so like a civil servant, and then the soldiers guild or the combative guild where they're more combat focused. Both can be done, both yield reputation, both yield rewards. They get quests from a bounty board, and then come to the table, and they can combine numbers, these stones, to create beta stones, which have a mean and standard deviation, which can then be imbued. I should go to this slide because this has this is the full representation of it. So they get a task, they create a stone, and then they attempt the task. If they succeed, they get reputation. If they fail, they can try again, or they can abandon the task. There's your persistence. When they select the task, there we go. They have type, combative or civil, and difficulty, hard, medium, and easy. Combative is go take out a bandit. Civil is go help this elderly woman break down her door. Difference there is in combative quest, you get hit back, so your HP matters. There's the attack and defense, the attack and blocking. Civil quest, you just have to create a theta stone that has exactly the mean and standard deviation to overcome that task. So you don't have to worry about health as much. I think this is the core mechanic of the game. The player will continue through this cycle until they've gotten enough reputation to enter one of the two guilds, and then that's game end. This is where the magic is, and this is where we've had the most fun, and where I think I need the most help, maybe, because it's definitely, there's a lot of things we can do, and we've had 1,000 revisions of this. But game-based learning, we're trying to really blend the content into the gameplay. So in this game, the player, like I said, they make a theta stone. It has that mean and standard deviation. When they imbue their familiar, their creature, their Pokemon, whatever it is, obvious allusion to Pokemon here. The mean is the power that goes into the attack and defense. So when they attack, the mean provides the damage that they deal, and then when they block, the mean is the amount of damage that's prevented when they block. The standard deviation influences the attack and block by giving one standard deviation. So when a player attacks, they're going to attempt to deal this damage, but the actual damage is somewhere between 1 plus or minus standard deviation around their mean.
So is this like sampling from a normal distribution, or is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't explain that. We're sampling from between 1 standard deviation of the mean.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
To determine how much damage is either dealt or how much damage is either negated.
Got it.
And the standard deviation also provides a HP modifier, and I'll see that on the next slide. And then skewness, which goes a little bit, this is our mean and standard deviation, our main thing. Every player should get that. That's our goal. Skewness are for the players that they already got it and they're pushing a little bit further. Highly skewed distributions, though, have a penalty to health, output. That's still kind of working on. Right now, I have it set up to penalize health, but I also wanted to penalize reputation. So it's like the skew side. We have like using skewed distributions are kind of like dark magic almost. A couple of examples that make this the real formula and make this pretty clear. First guess, anybody's gonna say, well, I'm gonna put 10 tens in there. Mean of 10, standard deviation of 0. But the attack and defense is the mean minus the absolute value of the skewness. So you end up with a divide by 0. Your standard deviation is 0, so your HP has got to divide by 0, and so your familiar automatically dies. The story there is like they come out and they just die. They're like, they can't survive with that. Another trick might be a bunch of 10s and 1 9. But the HP, which has a base of 50, that could be changed. The health points are determined by 50 times the standard deviation. So we get a boost up, but then it's divided by the absolute value of the skewness rounded up. So, because like with this one, I got with one of them, if we had a skewness of like 0.3, then we end up with like a health of 1,000 or something. So we round up to 1. So then you end up with just whatever it is, the 50 times the standard deviation divided by 1. So this one is just purely random, just ran between. We see we get a mean of 6, standard deviation of 2, skewness is 0. This is a bug because the skewness ended up being 0, which that's just a bug. Got to work that one out. Not sure yet on that one. Full 10s, again, divide by zeros. All 10s in the 9. This is where, somebody would go jump here, but then we end up with HP of 3. So it doesn't take much to knock that person out if you're dealing, if the other player's dealing 6 or so. So very weak. One metric here that you can play with is, do you want to make a tankier character by increasing your standard deviation, reducing mean, or do you want a heavy hitter that's kind of fragile by improving your mean and not concerned about your standard deviation? So there's some strategy there to it that you have to get a decent understanding of your mean and standard deviation. The catch is this formula in the background that isn't necessarily statistical, and so there's some conversion there, but that's going to come in the instructional content. Attacking, every round they have a choice, attack or block. Do you want to attack and deal damage, or do you want to negate the coming damage?
And so are these formulas told to players?
Yes. Yeah, I want everything to be transparent. We've had, that's on a different book, like a bookcase in the lab. It is up here. Yeah, so this is our lab. We have some work in Unity already done. We just need to connect everything. So like the bookcase can be our instructional aids where they can go and look up, here's the formulas for that and whatnot. We've also talked about, can we get ChatGPT in here to answer questions? This is the thing we want to play with, but throw that down the road a bit. Yeah, that's it. That's the game. That's the study design. So any suggestion on study design, the combat system, and then any other red flags that people are seeing just going through this.
Okay, so just to confirm, or at least my own understanding, so the player picks quests, they go off and do them. All quests are essentially like this RPG combat scenario, but in a civil one, you don't ever have to block.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then when you go out, you create a distribution by essentially picking 10 numbers. You can,
Yeah, and
or
that was a question I actually had written down here and then erased. But trying to decide on whether or not like to cap how many stones they can use. Should we have like some stones already populated on the table so they have to work with a distribution, like the start of a distribution? No, that's very open.
okay.
We're very open to that.
And then your attack and defense are set by the mean of that distribution. But then when you actually do an attack, do you sample from the distribution, or do
Yeah.
you like uniform random the standard deviation bounds? Like you said you did one standard deviation. How do you like shelve it there, or do you let it sample the actual distribution?
Yeah, I was gonna right now I'm trimming it down to one standard deviation. Because otherwise, then we could have some it makes it appealing to leave it all the way open and just the off chance that you're gonna roll a 10.
Right, yeah,
So
you get some
yeah.
extreme unlikely value.
Yeah. And I have a Python script to simulate some of these, like, to go around and around and around, but we need to do some more work on getting a more robust simulation so we can see certain cases coming out. But
Got it.
so far, this has been the least holy of design.
Gotcha. And then the skew comes in to penalize your power and your HP.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. And so then are players constantly coming up with these new distributions, or is it like if it's like a Pokemon, do you have like your wand and you get to keep
Yeah,
using it?
no, that is one difference. The Theta Stones are a one-time use sort
Okay.
of thing. So you make it, you imbue it, you make an attempt. Now, if you try again, I think this cycle you can try again with that same distribution. But if you abandon or pass, then that Data Stone is used up.
Okay. And so then the outcome measures you were talking about up at the top, the concrete ones that you want to correlate with self-efficacy. You've got persistence
Right.
seems relatively straightforward to measure.
Yeah.
You can continue, like how often do they keep going back to a thing? Though it is kind of slightly complicated by the need to go back. So like if they succeed on the first shot, then they don't have to be persistent.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of a nuance in that.
There, some of that get covered in the ability to select hard, medium, and easy.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think one rule of thumb when you're trying to get at persistence is that you have to have something. I mean, I think Eisenberg, I forget what he called it, but they had the impossible anagrams. And I think in games, though, we can go a little bit better to where instead of making something impossible, we can just make it really hard. And
Mm-hmm.
so looking for some of these hards that are really hard.
Right. Uh, and what how do you conceptualize difficulty there? Say easy, medium, hard. Like what controls that?
Yeah, the good question, actually. So for the civil task, part of it is getting a very precise, so getting an exact mean with a very narrow standard deviation, so they can get a very precise value. Some of the flavor there is imagine they need to bust open a chest without damaging the content. If they go too high, it damages the contents. If they go too low, that's the one for civil. For combat is probably going to be having the bandit or the opponent with particularly good stats that are difficult to beat. Again, that's going to require some more of the simulations to run to figure out what those are, but that's what it is right now. A little foggy still, but
Okay. I also don't need to take the whole floor here. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand or.
Yeah, hi. I'm
Hey,
Jesse Younger. This is the first time I'm joining this group. I work with PBS
welcome.
Kids actually, and
Cool.
this is really exciting because we sort of attempted a somewhat similar thing, but with kids, with uh 3 to 5 year olds basically. So we were
Yeah.
looking at measuring social emotional learning skills with a game, and obviously it was less complicated because we were looking at preschoolers, not adults. But just the difficulty piece in particular, we attempted something like this in terms of we gave them a some levels with options of like try the harder one or not, or like go
Mhm.
for the easy one, and wanted to see if that looked at sort of that persistence, or I guess sort of risk taking. I don't know if that counts, but like how much would they push themselves to um,
Mhm.
go for the harder one. And so I was curious if you were with your difficulty, are you giving them the option or are you like forcing them to try the hard one? A lot of our struggle with, so for PBS Kids with those games, like these are just games that we're like letting anybody play, right? We're not observing them at
Mhm.
all. This is like in the wild.
Beautiful.
So we have no way of making the kids do the harder one, right? And so if they just never do the harder version, then we kind of just don't get to look at that condition, right?
Mhm.
So what are you doing to avoid that? I guess is part of the question.
That is an particularly interesting issue with persistence is uh it, if they didn't do if they didn't choose to do one of the harder ones, but then also if you have somebody that comes in that's just good enough that even the hardest that you got is too easy. In that situation, it's kind of like, giving a multiplication table to college freshmen, right? Like the assessment isn't um, doesn't work quite well for them because they've already surpassed that. Now that works in, I think, in the scope of persistence because yeah, you have to have something that's difficult enough. Um, my target is like middle school, to like sixth to eighth grade, seventh to eighth, if I can get at it. The question of leaving it open, letting them choose is so hard because my goal is to um, maintain as much authenticity in the behaviors as possible and allow as much automaticity for the students so they can do what they want to do. If you have a student that comes in and they just bam easy levels, now the return on the reputation is far less. So it's going to take them a lot longer. In my case, that is indicative of lower self-efficacy because they're just not wanting, they're putting more effort in taking the longer route to avoid the difficulty. Again, we're dealing with an area that is so very, very context specific too that that doesn't necessarily work in like social emotional constructs. But with persistence, that's kind of the idea there. Same with goal setting. Do they have to set a goal? Well, no, wait, hold on. I'm gonna walk that back. We got two variations of the goal setting. One is um, here's the dialogue. Do you want to set a goal? I don't love that one because then you're gonna have people like, nah, I don't care. And it could just be a value issue. Another is looking at more goal orientation where we have mastery versus performance. This is a bit more complicated where we talked about having dashboards of feedback. One is mastery feedback. So this is how you did before, this is how you're doing now. And the other is this is how you're doing relative to your peers, that percentile. Which dashboard are they going to more often? Which dashboard are they engaging with? Which one are they more interested in? And then as an extension of that, which one are they setting goals in? So they could set a goal of, I want to do better than I did last time, or I want to do better than Bob on the leaderboard. And then risk taking is still a fuzzy one. You know, I didn't want to make it a gamble, but having a something that they have to put up that's based on skill, so it can't be a random chance because then it's gambling, but something that's potentially lost by taking that higher bet. Yeah, does that get at your question?
Yeah, this is really cool. Just like thinking about these different contexts, and I appreciate how you're thinking about applying, like making it a game, like that it's still a game that kids like to play, right?
Hopefully.
Right.
I'm actually kind of following up on that. I'm kind of curious about this persistence construct. Are you interested in persistence in the face of adversity or persistence in the face of difficulty? Because I think a thing you could play with, which is kind of interesting, given that your game is probabilistic, you can cheat. You don't have to roll real dice. You can face them with adversity at will, regardless of how difficult it is supposed to be. And so like you can make them fail the first shot on a given round every time. You could guarantee it. And then do they do it again? So like you actually get to play with that and kind of leverage the game design of it. And then I also don't know if you know of this work by Derek Lomas, but he did some stuff about difficulty choice and how that affects persistence or not with kids playing games online. So super relevant.
I really like that idea of having just, you know, a certain moment that it's triggered, that they are going to fail, and then we see how they react to that failure, and doing that maybe a couple of times throughout. I love that idea.
You probably don't want to do it too much because then it'll start to kind of spoil it'll give away the secret. But you could have like, if you had like, this is going to be like a persistence assessment moment at like level 4, and just like, you're going to fail. Do you do it again? You can kind of do those kinds of things. That's kind of one of the nice features of game design.
Yeah, and or if for like the combat situation, if you have like a really difficult to beat boss, like that's just like insanely overpowered, right? Like how often will they come back and try to defeat them, even if, or like, and right, what are their actions based off of that? Do they try to go be more powerful? Will they keep trying? What types of strategies do they use? That sort of thing could be really exciting.
Well, and that's actually a really good point, because I did some work earlier on with we were trying to get it wheel spinning to differentiate between what we were calling positive persistence and pernicious persistence, because I like alliteration. But the wheel spinning. And so another example in here would be, they go up against that big boss. Do they just keep going with the same theta stone, replay, or do they step back and go try some different stones? And actually, maybe we should have a call out or a jump out here where they're like, you can try again. Do you want to change your stones? I like that. Well, I can't type. But yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Anyone else have questions, thoughts? I can keep going with some of my own ideas. But
I was gonna say I can jump in.
Go ahead.
I'm kind of curious about what features of gameplay you're interested in for persistence specifically. One of the projects that I've been working on recently, we changed the way that we were actually analyzing it. We had a really good model for persistence, using like traditional data features, things like number of moves that players were making, and this is in a math game called Shadowspect. My advisor is YJ Kim. So we had like time that they spent in the level and things like that. I took a step back and started looking at just what is their actual like sequence of gameplay and what are they doing? Because one of the things that I noticed was that somehow, even though level completion isn't in that model that's being calculated for persistence, it was playing a role when we started looking more qualitatively at like what is actually happening in gameplay. And we would have moments where students would like try for a really long time on a level and they just couldn't get it done. And they would just sit there and they would keep working and keep working. And so they'd have a really high persistence score for that level. And then they would jump to another level and they would sit and stare at it for a while and they would walk away with a 0 persistence because they didn't actually like try anything, even though like when you actually qualitatively look at what's happening in the data, you can see that there are parallels between the levels and they were just sitting there thinking.
Yeah.
And so they're still being persistent, but we're not capturing it with those data features. And I'm wondering if you've thought a little bit about how that might show up in some of the data that you're looking at.
Yeah, that so that's specifically, I mean, that's exactly the issue that we were tackling. Let's see. It was a conference paper. This was like right at the start of COVID, so it's all hazy. But it was a conference paper. We've never gotten it written up, so I don't have anything to share. But it was in physics playground, and in that it's kind of like crayon physics, where they solve the puzzle and they get a no medal, silver medal, or a gold medal. And so I tried to step back and look at who was going and changing, who was going back. Oh yeah, no. Who was leaving the level? So they're stuck on a level, they don't solve it, they leave and go do something else, and then they come back and they switch it. So do they change from unsolved to silver or from silver to gold? That was how I was trying to get at that with just looking at gameplay behavior, trying to see, I think I said it was more mature persistence. No, what was that? More cognitively mature persistence, because they're taking a step back. It's self-regulated learning, I guess. They're taking a step back, doing something else, and coming back to it. But that issue of people just thinking, and the only option you really have there is tracking for pure gameplay data. The only option you have is tracking the mouse location. Are they just kind of running around the screen and looking at points? But then the next step there is you got to look at the facial recognition data, eye tracking, something like that, and that's a lot harder. And so that just staring at the game and thinking behavior is one that I don't. That's a really tricky one. That would be cool to get at, but if they're not interacting with the game, how else do you do it?
Well, or even thinking about like how they're making those choices, like you said, between like stones and what they're deciding in your game. Like how much time are they even just spending like going back and forth between them, like before they commit to making a decision? Things like that I think are really interesting. One of the games that I work on like has moments where kids are trying to run experiments and like going back and forth and seeing like, oh, I added this one and then I took it back out and then I added it again and then I took it back out, and just what are they like doing? Sometimes those can be really hard to capture in aggregate.
Yeah, and that was my goal, was that wheel spinning. It's either Beck or Gong. I can't remember the last name, but whoever that is that did the wheel spinning. To me, for persistence, that's where a real issue is right now, is trying to differentiate between positive persistence and wheel spinning, because the definition of persistence does not exclude wheel spinning or pernicious persistence, if you like the alliteration. Yeah.
So I just want to call out a comment in the chat. Apparently the field day team is having trouble with their mic. But Luke Swanson mentioned that Dave at field day is interested in that NPC interviewer concept, and has some work that they're potentially starting up around that. I've also seen there's some work in the Kai-Play community. Author names escaped me at the moment, but I can find it and send it to you. That's looked at some of this stuff, primarily around ways to do like, how do you do like a formal questionnaire in a game? And if it's like, if you have an NPC say it instead of have a random screen pop up in the middle of a VR experience or something. I think they were particularly in the context of VR where questionnaires are particularly disruptive. But
Oh yeah, that would be,
yeah, there have been some people looking at like gamifying questionnaires or dressing them up as interviews with characters.
Yeah, I will put that bug in his ear because we've talked about that with Cincio. We're talking about doing some of that there. But I think it's a must for game-based learning. I think it's the way to go because the self-reports are so disruptive and remove the bias. Now, I don't know, like there's also still, if I think you get a more authentic answer because I feel like somebody would be more comfortable, you know, if they're discouraged or they're frustrated to say, I'm never going to get this, to an NPC that doesn't look like it's a form that's going to be submitted somewhere. So I think there's a lot of power in there at getting at that. And again, I really think some of these large language models could be super useful for that. They're just so unwieldy still. I'm not sure how. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a master's student playing with a project trying to do a language learning game using ChatGPT based characters. They're not great game characters yet. I know people are working on that and it's pretty new, but like they're really, really bad at like leading you on in a puzzle. They just want to give you the answer. Because they're like trained to be customer service reps.
That's true, yeah.
And so at least the model we were using at the time was not very good at it. But I can see how you could train them in such a way that they could be better. But it was interesting.
Yeah, where was that? Why? I don't remember. Duolingo, I think is doing, I think it was Duolingo. Who's it Duolingo? But they're doing something where they're having it generate questions by giving them templates of these certain types of questions, and it's been successful at that. And so I did have it generate, like I gave it a self-efficacy instrument, like 10 questions, and I said, change this into a dialogue that you could ask, you know. That's a pretty good question. I mean, they're still pretty multi-choicey, but I think with some more prompting and kind of massaging of the output, I think it could get there. But then asking it, like, I was just talking with my colleague in Hong Kong, and he's wanting to try it as a qualitative for coding, for doing text analysis, doing coding. And we were having this discussion about, you know, if it codes something that is wrong or doesn't seem right, you know, how do you have that conversation with it? You know, and is it a conversation, or is it we're looking at this and we're having a conversation about what the magic machine told us, and that might give us some other ideas. So, you know, I think looking at different workarounds on that can still be interesting, even if the models are a little all over the place sometimes.
Right. But I do think trying to do a character questionnaire is interesting. But I think on the one hand, yes, it can get away from like some of the potential self-report biases. But another one that might be interesting to think about is from a game design side, what if the player is role-playing and that's the dialogue they're having with this character? Like, does the player feel like themselves, or do they feel like who they're supposed to be in the game? And is that the conversation they're having and not? So maybe they'd have a different kind of self-report bias.
Point.
And heavily going to be impacted by fidelity and representation and visuals and narrative and all that kind of stuff. But that's a thing to potentially be at least keep in the back of your mind.
A very, very good point. Yeah, the win thing. So our players going to be trying to win, like win with asking questions, or just playing to win rather playing to learning?
It's always interesting to me to think about how players that have experience in other systems are going to bring in their experience, for example, with NPCs, where you can get a quote wrong answer, or where they're trying to figure out, does this change my experience going forward? And that calculation of almost narrative min-maxing, that if you have game savvy players, is that going to influence how they interact with that NPC?
That is a really good point. For me, I mean, there's one angle where I'm, 6th and 7th grade, I want to say like, they're not going to see that. But that's not true, because I mean, there's some of the 6th and 7th graders that they are game masters beyond anything I'll ever be. I don't necessarily think that's all true. I also wonder if there's, when like I'm thinking of Skyrim, if you pick a certain choice, you say, I hate you versus I want to help, then you kind of have a guess of what's going to happen. So maybe it's something where the way that the prompts are designed don't give off a clear and obvious valence, I suppose, which then has the issue of leaning more towards, is this just a survey? So I don't know. That's a very interesting discussion. Oh, okay, bye.
Yeah, I do want to be conscious of, we are coming up on time roughly.
That went quick.
Well, not necessarily. I have a relatively tight thing I need to get to, but it's been common for these meetings, or if anybody has free time, to stick around for them to run a little longer. But just in case anybody wants to be conscious of the hour, it is coming up. But we have a few more minutes before that matters.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't tell her thank you. But thank you, Jesse.
And also, if anybody on the call, though I think at this point, not the case, but if anybody hasn't yet joined the Slack to follow up and maybe continue this conversation, we can do that there.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw, I dropped a link in the chat to just a paper that I
did,
mentioned offhandedly of. Derek Lomas has some really interesting work around this Battleship Numberline game, which in a lot of ways is kind of like a proto model for some of the data stuff that this group's talked about. But I've always found his work really interesting, because he essentially finds that like there isn't really this like inverted U of challenge and difficulty, at least with this game. He can't make it too easy. Like there is like being low difficulty doesn't turn people off. But he does find, and this is actually a different one of his papers, but I can go into that too, is novelty in the problem set. So if it's always the same thing, boring. If it's always different, frustrating. If it's suboptimal in the middle, that's what people stick around to play. And this is like an online free choice setting. And so finding this kind of like, I don't think he necessarily in that particular study called it persistence. I think he just called it engagement. But showing up on a different construct than necessarily what you might think, given the literature that's out there.
Yeah, and that, I think along that, like we have the combative and the civil quest types, and I really want to add to that, like, not too many, but at least like maybe 4 or 5 guilds that all have kind of a different mechanic at play, while still using the same value. I mean, we look at the mean and standard, which is kind of just the value in the stone. So how can we apply that in a different mechanic to give them a different experience that they can work towards?
Right.
But thank you for the paper. That's going to be very interesting. Yay.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. And very interesting project, very interesting work.
Thank you.
And we'd love to see
make
where
it
it
work.
goes.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank y'all, and we'll see y'all next time.
Yep. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.